I think there's been two sort of parallel paths that the cruise industry has been taking. They've been announcing these successive launch dates, and most recently that got pushed from the end of July to mid-September. But those are, for all intents and purposes, placeholders at this point. A lot needs to happen between now and these ships setting sail. The other track is they've been preparing for significantly worse than that. So they've been shoring up their balance sheet in preparation for a much longer layoff.
James, a lot of these case spikes that we are seeing in Arizona, Texas, and Florida are being blamed, of course, on being inside. It's basically their winter. Everybody's back inside with the windows closed because it's so hot. They're cranking the AC, and if they're going to bars, everybody's kind of whatever. Cruise lines do kind of appear to be floating bars and floating restaurants, the same things that are being re-shut down right now. Is there any way possible, and I'll ask Seema the same question right after this, to socially distance on a cruise ship other than pulling out a sleeping bag and maybe, going to sleep on the Lido deck outside?
Yeah, I think they're working towards that very question. And I think whenever they open back up, it is going to be a look and feel for these cruise ships. I think it's probably safe to say there's going to be a capacity limit. What exactly that is, maybe 50% of normal capacity. So they're going to be spreading people out, from room to room. I think it's also safe to say that they're going to be using their largest ships to accomplish that with the lower break-even points, right? In some instances, only need to have these ships 30% full to generate a profit. And in a lot of instances, the largest ships, the newest ships, also have the most public space per passenger, which should also help with those social distancing efforts.
Seema, what are the CEOs saying?
Well, I think unlike, Brian, the airlines where most people just take a flight to get from point A to point B, there's a lot of entertainment value attached to the cruise lines, from parades in the promenade, Broadway shows to ziplining. So I'm very curious, as the cruise lines sort of detail their path forward, whether those activities will be still embraced by the cruise lines, if they will be allowed and offered to their cruise line passengers, and if not, if the ultimate appeal of cruising changes and how that diminishes the value. And James, I'm curious, even if you look at pricing and bookings for 2021, you are starting to see a slight uptick, but still at relatively low values.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what has surprised most investors time and time again when we talk to these cruise management teams during the pandemic is that it doesn't appear to be a demand issue, at least near term. I think the limitation over the next, 4, 5, 6 months going to be a regulatory one rather than a demand one. When they're ready to open these ships up, it would seem that there are, plenty of consumers that are willing to get on board these ships, which I think it's a surprise to a lot of people. I think if you polled your friends, cruise lines would, and maybe rightfully so, be pretty far in the back of the line in terms of activities that they would like to return to.
Honestly, not to be whatever anecdotal, my parents were scheduled for a cruise in May for their 50th anniversary, and that got obviously bumped, and they sort of rebooked for November. I was like, guys, what do you think? And they said, well, the ship's sold out, so we better jump in soon, which I kind of found surprising, James. But you mentioned, really interesting, the regulatory word. Given that these ships are flagged non-U.S., right, wherever it may be, Panama or the Bahamas, does the U.S. government have the power to force them to not sail? Or could they literally say, we're shipping off no matter what you say?
Oh, no, they absolutely. The CDC has a significant amount of power with respect to allowing these ships to resume operations. And that is ultimately not the only governing body, but the single most important governing body. As they have the power to prevent the ports from allowing these ships to set sail. But it's not the only regulatory hurdle that they need to pass. For us to go back to normal at some point, and I think the initial, but you have to have all the various countries and the ports within those countries come to agreements with the cruise lines. The worst scenario, I think, for most passengers, even more so than catching coronavirus in a lot of instances, is just being stranded at sea for an extended period of time. And we saw that early this year. And I think that's a real fear factor for consumers. We have to get to the point where ports, even if there are cases on board, are willing to let those ships port at their docks, because that is a major issue.